So, is it true? Yeah, it's true. Preppers have been misjudged and labeled as psychotic, paranoid individuals, right? We all did it. They're believers in conspiracy theories, right? Sure. Maybe, maybe not. But I believe we all have kind of reevaluated our view and our perspective of what a prepper is. Are they really just people who hate the government? Are they really just people who hate society? Or are they all introverts that want to just be off to themselves? No, preppers are people like me and you. And even though some of us, like me, have probably misjudged them, and yes, I was one of those who laughed inside. I was one of those who, if the subject of prepping came up, I probably giggled a little bit under my breath and thought, well, these people are a little bit nutty. Well, I'm not that way anymore. But what changed my perspective? That's what the video is about today. What changed my perspective? And that's a simple question. But my answer, it's a bit more complex and complicated than the question. But the reason is because, well, let me tell you, I'll tell you this. I'll keep this video as brief as possible because no one likes a long video. I know I don't. So my perspective changed in the mid-90s, in the mid-1990s, and I began searching for farmland when it started changing. The reason so is because I grew up on a farm and I wanted a farm and I wanted property. I wanted something that I could leave to my children one day in a trust, but I also wanted a place where I could grow my own food. And I wanted that farm to be clean, with clean, organic history. I didn't want land that had been contaminated with chemicals, with pesticides and herbicides and all the different chemicals that ruin the dirt. I wanted something that was cleaner. So I needed a farm that had not been occupied in a long time. So this property that I'm standing on right now is an old farm. I bought it back 20-something years ago. But I started thinking about it back in the 90s. And the reason I bought the farm here is because it's up in the Appalachian Mountains. It's an old farm. No one has lived on this property in about 100 years. It has not been farmed since before all the farmers started using chemicals on their farms. So this is a clean piece of dirt, and I own it from the top of the mountain all the way down to the bottoms. And I know that my water's clean. I know that the property's clean, and it was a good purchase. I purchased the farm literally when things were changing around the world. The U.S. was changing its political policies, and they were changing as quickly as what I would call lightning speed. And as someone who's traveled around the world like I have, and I've seen other countries going through changes, countries that were democracies, countries that were doing well, but then as they made changes, going more towards socialism and other decisions politically, I saw these countries go downhill fast. And I knew that our country was a young country. In fact, in 2026, we will be 250 years old. That's still young. It's only a quarter of a millennial old as an established country here that we call the United States of America. Now, in those short few 200 and something years, we've gone through so many changes. We've gone through a civil war. We've gone through world wars with other countries. We've seen times change economically. We've seen our currency change quite heavily as well. And right now, in the time that I'm talking to you in 2023, we're also seeing some major changes take place here in our country, around the world. Our economy is not the normal atmosphere and environment that we normally would face, and we need to be prepared for it. And so I've seen these things coming back in the 80s and 90s. I've seen changes taking place, and I also seen things behind the scenes that I realized was going to affect us very heavily here in the United States. So I purchased this farm right literally within weeks after 9/11, 2001, when the World Trade Centers were hit with terrorists. And I felt passionate about buying this farm prior to that happening. And I was already in the process of buying it prior to 9/11's event. And it stunned me that that this happened on 9/11/2001. Was in the middle of buying the property. I went to a town in North Georgia to buy 3 ATVs so my children could ride their four-wheelers on the property. We knew we were going to buy the property. And while I was at the ATV store buying a trailer, equipment trailer, utility trailer to pull the four-wheelers on, and to buy the 3 four-wheelers that I bought that day, the news came on the little TV up in the corner behind the cash register at the ATV place, the motorcycle place where we bought the four-wheelers. And it was showing the first tower had been hit and the second tower being hit while we were watching it live. I was stunned. I was floored. Here I was buying the piece of property because I felt like the world was becoming unstable. I felt like everything was going in the wrong direction. And then all of a sudden, prior to me buying the property, but already in the plans of buying it, this happens right in front of my eyes. And I closed on the deal of buying the property just a few weeks after 9/11. And guess what? I bought the property from the gentleman who owns the construction company who got the contract to clean up 9/11 in New York. What's the coincidences of that? So, saying all that, the fact that I purchased it from him, I also had a lot of deep conversations with him as well. And I also realized there was a lot of corruption in the Middle East, been that way for years. Don't know if anyone's ever seen a fire ant nest. We have them here. We have them all over the South. And the interesting thing about a fire ant nest, they'll build a mound and you just rake the top of it off and there's ants everywhere. It's amazing how many ants are in a fire ant nest. And if you get in them, they'll sting you and they hurt. And I mean, it's terrible. They can kill you if enough of them sting you. Some people want to try to eradicate those fire ant nests, and you can do it. But you can't do it just by trying to attack that nest. You have to attack the area all around it. Sometimes it's best to leave that fire ant nest alone. Because if you try to disturb that fire ant nest, and as soon as they feel threatened, what's going to happen is it's going to split up into about 5 or 10 new fire ant nests, because they're going to separate out and they're going to go out into an area around them and create a circle of new fire ant nests, and they're going to multiply because you have disturbed their nests. In many ways, that's exactly what we did when we went into Iraq. We disturbed the Middle East. Yes, it was doing things that were wrong. Even though the news came out that there was weapons of mass destruction, and the news came out later there was not, there were still a lot of things going on in the Middle East to support terrorism around the world, and obviously a lot of bad things were happening. I'm not here to advocate whether or not we did the right thing going into Iraq like we did. I personally think we didn't do the right thing. I feel like we could have done it differently than we did, and by doing it the way we did, it was like stirring up a fire ant nest where we spread the enemy out and we made the enemy stronger in so many ways. But it goes beyond that. While all that was going on, here we were seeing this happen before our eyes. We're spending trillions of dollars in the Middle East in a war, but that wasn't what really caught my attention. What caught my attention was my travels through all over the world, through Asia and also through the eastern parts of the world. And I've seen what was happening in Dubai. I've seen what was happening in the United Arab Emirates. And here we were seeing a new country being built, the United Arab Emirates, and one of the most modern cities, the most modern city in the world being built, Dubai. But it was also being funded by the United States US dollar. We call the US dollar the petrodollar because ever since the US dollar was not any longer backed up by gold, when Nixon released the dollar out on the open market, when he released the gold into the open market, and he opened up trade with China, and a lot of the gold was sold to China, and our dollar was no longer backed by gold. The agreement was to back it up with the transactions of barrels of oil through the Saudis. So the Saudis became our gold standard. The oil industry became our gold standard. And here we were entering into the first part of this millennial with a presidency that was deep, deep in the oil industry, right? Deep in the oil industry. And all these things are happening in the Middle East. But not just that, but also here we were with our central banking system, the Federal Reserve, that is not owned by the United States. The U.S. Treasury is, but not the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve is part of the central banking system. The central banking system crosses borders. Central banking system is what controls all of the fiat monies that are being transacted from currency to currency around the world. And that is what supplies us with our monetary means we call money. And it's the petrodollar that backed that up. Our U.S. Treasury prints the money, but it does not create the money. The money is created through the Federal Reserve. Our interest rates are determined by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not part of the United States. It is not owned by the United States. I hope I'm educating you a little bit here if you don't know this already, but they control our money. And when our gold was not backing up the dollar anymore, petroleum started backing it up. That's why they call it the petrodollar. So during all this craziness that's taking place in the Middle East, we're also building, funding, financing with our central banks here in the United States, this new country called United Arab Emirates, UAE. And it's owned by the Saudis, which back our dollar. With every barrel of oil that's being sold is being transacted through the U.S. dollar. All the other currencies around the world were using the U.S. dollar as their gold standard. It's true. And then all of a sudden we've seen in 2005, 2006, we've seen another phenomena that took place in the United States, initiated by the Federal Reserve, as they stimulated the market and stimulated the mortgage industry with subprime mortgages through our banking system, and it caused people to be able to get loans to buy homes that could not even qualify to buy homes. It created a housing bubble. And here I was owning one of the largest general contracting businesses in our area in Georgia at the time, and I owned it for many years. And I was a debt-free company, stayed debt-free all the way through, but I saw what was happening right in front of my eyes. Because anytime something's happening in the world where governments are getting involved, most likely something else is happening that people aren't talking about, but they want your attention over here while they're doing something over here. So here we were, we financed the United Arab Emirates. We financed one of the most modern places in the entire history of the world, called Dubai, to be built with the tallest skyscraper in the world, some of the most elaborate technology in the world, right in the middle of a Saudi-owned brand new country. That how could we foreclose on a scenario that we financed with the money that they back? We could not. So the Federal Reserve created a housing bubble. They created something very short term, very quick, that happened overnight, and before you knew it, it was the excuse that was used to tell everyone the housing bubble is ruining the economy. Drove us right straight into what we call a recession. Housing bubble burst, which was overstimulated, done on purpose? Question mark? I'm saying that because I don't want anyone to say that I said it was done on purpose. I'm saying it as a question mark. Was it done on purpose? By the Federal Reserve that managed all that was going on here. A war in the Middle East going on at the same time around oil. Not only that, but building one of the most elaborate cities in the history of the world in a country that is probably the most elaborate country in the world, the United Arab Emirates, owned by the Saudis. All this happening at the same time, a bubble bursts, and then what happens? Immediately the fix and the solution is the government comes in and bails the banks out. Interestingly that they bailed the banks out, because it's interesting to me, because the federal, what they call the FDIC, which is the insurance company that backs up any kind of reserves, right, in the banks. If you put money into the bank, you're insured for about $250,000 in your deposits. Anything above $250,000, you're not. But the bank bailout was not bailing out the FDIC. It was bailing out the banking industry. And if you notice, the news came out that all these banks got bailed out, but their executives took big bonuses out of those bailouts. What happened? Question mark. What happened? I'll tell you exactly what happened. We could not foreclose on a country, especially a country owned by the same people who was the gold standard of petroleum that backed up our dollar, that gave our dollar value, and therefore immediately, my dog's hearing something, he's acting up, and therefore immediately a housing bubble comes out in the middle of all this. In 2006, 2007, it finally starts crashing. We see the Great Recession. We see that all these people all over the United States are losing their homes, the greatest foreclosure rate of any of our history in America, ever. Took us straight into a major recession in 2007, 2008. And it lasted. I've kept up with all the recessions in history and in my lifetime, looked at their patterns. We have a recession almost on the calendar for about every 8 to 11 years, average about every 10 years. It's interesting that the first recessions that started back immediately after the Federal Reserve took over our money, which was a few years after the Civil War took place. There was no more Confederate dollar. The U.S. dollar became the dollar. But yet, we gave over control and everything about our dollar to, I'm not going to mention the names, but it's the ones who control the central banking system and the Federal Reserve, big names in our world that are some of the richest people on earth that many people really don't list in the sense of the other billionaires that we talk about. But I will tell you this, we're subject to them. We've been subject to them since around 1912. And we've had a recession almost every 10 years. And the first recession lasted 3 months. Next recession lasted 5 months. Next recession, it kept growing and growing and growing and growing every time there was a recession. I looked at my family and I told them in 2007, 2008, I said, I'm closing the construction business down. I had a large general contracting business, very successful. I said, let's close it down. They said, are you sure? I said, yes, because this recession is a game changer. It is not just a recession. It is a new defining of our economy. And it's going to meet up with our next recession. It's going to be so long. We may have felt like the recession of 2008 was over, but it was not. We have been pushing forward those problems ever since, and it's 2023. And now here we are introducing the CBDC, a digital currency, to take us into in my opinion, hear that part, in my opinion, a cashless society. CBDC means central bank digital currency. The servers went online in February as planned. I've been talking about this since October last year, so that the CBDC would take over our currency. It's part of the Federal Reserve central banking system. It's a digital blockchain technology currency. We get freaked out over our digital currency scenario here about to happen. I just have to let you know very quickly, we've been in digital currency for a long time. In fact, only about 18% or so of our money here in the United States has been printed into dollar bills or coins. 82% approximately has been digital. If you go to the bank, you get a loan, you borrow money to buy a house, there's no dollar bills moving from one bank to another. There's only numbers moving in a computer representing that monetary value. So when someone does a credit card transfer, you're paying a bill on your credit card from your bank account, it's just numbers. Or if you're charging something with your credit card, it's just numbers. The money, the dollar bills, the coins are not there. So recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, at least 2 years, a lot of people have been going to the banks to pull their monies out. And as they go to the bank to pull their monies out because they're afraid of the economy, there's not enough cash there. If you've been going to the bank pulling money out, have you noticed that it's new dollar bills, brand new printed dollar bills? Instead of printing those dollar bills through the U.S. Treasury, through their connection with our U.S. Treasury. Instead of them saying, just print it up, we're going to allow those dollar bills to represent what's already digitally representative in the flow of money that's in the United States. Instead of doing that, instead of printing money that represents the money that's already represented, they printed money and approved it to be printed on top of that by the trillions. We call that the repo. When banks are asking for money and they're initiating bonds, and et cetera, to back that money up, to give cash to their depositors when their depositors are asking for money in cash to take home with them and to store money outside of the bank. Like I say, 82%, approximately 82% of the money in the United States is not in dollar bills. So they had to print it, but they should not have printed it on top of what was already existing digitally. But because they did, the Federal Reserve drove us into inflation at a rocket speed rate. They know that. People aren't talking about this. The news does not define this like I'm defining it right now. But the Federal Reserve has been manipulating our currencies through interest rates and through dumping more funds into our society instead of allowing the funds that's already in there to be represented when people were pulling the money out of the bank. This took place in the amount of the repo system, which is monies by the banks being printed at an alarming rate since Joe Biden has been in office, to the point that more money has been printed than our GDP is per year. That threshold is dangerous. Our money system is in a tailspin. So back to the point here. Why has my perspective changed in regards to prepping? My perspective has changed in regards to prepping because our world is in a tailspin economically, and it can't keep going like this. There's going to be some changes, and those changes are going to be decided upon by people that are not you. And when they get decided upon by people who are not you, and they have their interest in mind instead of yours, and it's going in the direction it's going right now, it's going to affect food. It's going to affect shelter. It's going to affect wherewithal. My suggestion, when someone comes to me and says, they're going to say, Jeff, what should I invest in? Should I invest in gold? Should I invest in silver? Should I pull my money out of the bank? What should I do? My response to that is very simply this. And I'm ahead of you. Buy a piece of land. Buy dirt. Even if it's only an acre. Find you a piece of land, buy that land, pay it off. Buy some more of it, pay it off. Get it debt-free. Take yourself to a place of sustainability so that if things go in the wrong direction, you have an asset there. Buy a piece of land. Buy a piece of land for the security and the wherewithal that you need to be able to survive no matter what comes your way. You can have a garden in your backyard. You don't have to grow everything that you eat. You have neighbors, you have friends, you have networks. One of the things that I am very focused on right now is developing a network of homesteaders, developing a network of people who are service providers. Why? Because when we go to the CBDC, we go to a cashless society where everything is digital. Someone else has control over your money. And it's not like the U.S. Treasury. It's like the Federal Reserve only. Why? Because why do you actually need a bank like we have today if you don't have cash or coins? Why do you need that? If everything is like a digital wallet and it's a central banking system, which is global, the CBDC, no matter what they call it, even if they say this represents the U.S. dollar, even if it is a CBDC, the CBDC also is in effect in Europe, and it's going into effect in July. This is May, June, July, 2 months from now. And when it gets into effect in Europe, goes into effect here in the United States with our other allies throughout Asia and around the world, You're dealing with a one world bank, period. It may look like something else, may look like lipstick on a pig, but it's still a central bank currency, and it's not individual currencies like we have known it to be up until now. You'll be able to go anywhere with your smart device, anywhere with your credit card or whatever device that they choose to use, and it will go in that direction. Now, I'm not going to get spiritual here. I'm not going to get into the biblical things. I want to, because I graduated from a Bible college. I have a lot of background in church. I have a lot of background as a Christian, and you've known me to speak out in regards to that. And all I'll say is this: everything is lining up prophetically so that things that you have read about prophetically can take place in today's time that we're living in, that 50 years ago could not have taken place. Technology and the way that things are happening right now economically is going in that direction. Now, saying all that, why did my perspective on prepping change? Because it's smart math and it all adds up. I want to be able to barter. I want to be able to trade some eggs for some pork chops. I want to be able to trade some boards from the sawmill to someone else to ask them to help build me something. I want to be able to trade some chickens for something else down the road from one of my neighbors, where we can survive together with or without an electronic app keeping up with every purchase that I do. Because when we go to a cashless society, we need to be able to manage that. Prepping has gone to a whole new level when we think about it this way. It's not just looking for how to manage a catastrophe around the corner. It's how to survive without the shadowing of the big brother government looking over our shoulder everything that we do. When it goes to a cashless society, you will not even be able to go to a yard sale and buy someone's junk without it being digitally recorded and reported to the government. You won't even be able to give your child gas money to go on a date without the government recording that in their digital records and data. Cash allows you to live freely and independent from everyone looking at every move and everything that you do. And when we go to a cashless society, every transaction, no matter what it is, will be seen if people don't learn how to barter and trade outside of that. Not with money, but with goods and services. You'll hear more from me about that in the near and coming future. By the way, this is Jeff Welch from Welch Family Homestead. Please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching this video, which was phase 2 of, is it wise to waste any time becoming a prepper or prepping? I think it is. But don't look at the word prepping. Look at the word being prepared. Look at the word being smart. And look at the word being responsible. It's worth it. It's smart math. It all adds up. God bless.